Hi, my name is Andrew Campbell, the CEO and founder of Campbell Research and Consulting. Today we're going to be talking about just the critical role of pets in families impacted by domestic violence or child abuse, just really family violence in general. We see pets playing a critical role in so many homes across the country and really around the world. But they really do play such an even greater role in these homes impacted by family violence. As I said, I am the founder of Campbell Research and Consulting. About a year ago, decided to take the leap and start my own organization looking specifically into areas of overlap of abuse and violence in the home, looking at domestic violence, child abuse, and animal abuse, and really just doing all I can to further research and education and improving our response to these types of incidents. So when we think about some of the things pets provide, think about your own past, your own pets you've had in the past, pets you have now. What are some things that they have provided for you, or ways that they've made you feel? Just some of the things that I came up with. Pets provide protection, comfort, friendship, a sense of purpose, acceptance, stability, hope, or the idea of kind of a light in the darkness, and entertainment and laughter. Again, just some of the many things that pets provide for us. All of these things are critical components of emotional health and well-being, and they're critical for all of us, but how much more so for victims of violence occurring in the home. For many of them, that list you see there is so important for mental health and well-being. These animals may be their best chance at feeling those things. A sad but true reality for many of these adults and children in these homes impacted by violence. These animals often mean everything to them. They are so important to them, and that's why I think it's so important that we're remembering that. And when we look, as we'll get further into this today, as when we look to protect these families and try to do all we can to keep them safe and to get them out of danger and harm's way, we have to take into account their animal family members as well, because these victims often will not leave these animals behind. They will not come to shelter unless they can bring these animals with them, and for good reason. Again, think about all of these things here, and the pet being your only chance at any of that. Obviously, you're not going anywhere without them. In a single word, pets are family. Over recent survey found over 95% of Americans consider them to be that. Actually, I think closer to 98%. I'm not sure what was wrong with the other 2% if they didn't understand the question or they were having an off day. But pets absolutely are family, and Americans resoundingly agree with that. When we think about pets in America, thinking about prevalence from a nationwide survey, 68% of U.S. homes have at least one pet. This number actually rises. We see pets actually being more likely to be in homes where domestic violence occurs, with 80% of domestic violence homes, or homes where domestic violence occurs, having one or more pets or companion animals. We see dogs making up 53% of that pet population in these domestically violent homes or homes where DV occurs. Cats following up with 40%. But again, as we think about the things that these pets provide, and unfortunately that often making them a target of the perpetrator, right? The perpetrator is looking to inflict control and inflict as much harm as possible, or to gain control and inflict as much harm as possible in these homes. So obviously they're likely to attack the very thing that is keeping the victim going. And so when we think of it from that perspective, really any animal in these homes, regardless of whether it's a dog, cat, bird, turtle, is potentially at risk. Again, just thinking of what they represent to the victim. And this may look different in a rural environment where we see horses and other types of animals filling the same role. So again, thinking of what these animals represent is what makes them a target. Indicates that really any pet or any animal in these homes that fill that role would potentially be a target and at risk. further, when we talk about violence in pets, we know that victims of IPV report significant concern for their pet after they flee. In fact, many won't flee. Thinking again of a real example of a victim who talked about remaining in the home, she said, for 5 years longer than I should have, because the shelter in our area didn't accept pets. And the perpetrator told me that if I tried to leave, or if I did leave, it was a death sentence for my dog. And I knew he was telling the truth, that he wasn't bluffing. And unfortunately, that's the reality of what we see in research. There's something about animal abuse. When someone says they're going to do it, it's rarely an idle threat, even more so potentially than other forms of violence in the home. And so she delayed leaving the home. But she said, but the second time he put a gun down my throat in front of our child, I knew I had to get out of there. We had to say goodbye to that dog. And she described just a heartbreaking scenario for her son. She made it to shelter, so they finally reached safety, and she said, this is supposed to be my time of healing, just to start the process, but I can't, because all I can do is think about that dog. And so eventually she did end up sneaking out or away from the shelter one evening, back to her house, and found that the perpetrator had unfortunately left the dog out, and the dog she found the dog dead, unfortunately, in the backyard, and that he had kept his word. So again, we see obviously these victims expressing significant concern, and it often hindering any potential progress or the healing process after they leave the home. Obviously a great limiter to progress. And a good reason to return. We do hear of other victims who it becomes too much. They can't concentrate. They can't focus on anything else. They're worried about that animal, and they go back to the home. We hear of other things of victims commonly even living in their cars with that animal if they can't bring them with them into the shelter. A recent national survey found 90% of victims of IPV said a safe place for their pet would make their decision to leave easier. It is so difficult for these victims to leave the home. There are so many barriers they're facing. Here we have something that 90% say would make the difference. We have to take that seriously, and we have to respond to that. Recent information through Red Rover that was reported in the National Link Coalition's newsletter, a newsletter that if you don't receive, you should definitely sign up for. Just a tremendous resource in this area. You can see the link there on the bottom of the screen. But it was reported that 17% of domestic violence shelters in the U.S. now allow co-sheltering, where pets are allowed on-site or accommodated on-site. There are other foster options and things like that in other shelters. But again, thinking of the idea that 90% of victims say, do this for me and I'm more likely to leave. We're happy with 17% because it's showing an increase from the last several years, but we really need to see that number continue to climb. I mean, this again remains a critical reason for victims to remain in the home, and they need to know that their animal companion, their animal family member will be safe too when they leave this violence. I want to speak briefly too on the importance of the child-pet bond. Also a very important concept when we think of family, and you think of the list that I described and all the important things that these pets provide. Again, for these children to often potentially the only source of some of those things: comfort, security, stability. They may be living with a violent perpetrator and then a victimized adult, and it may not be that the victimized adult doesn't want to be there for them. They may just have nothing left. They may have had so much drained by the abuser that they just are unable to emotionally provide what these children need, and they often find that from these pets. It cannot, again, be overstated how important this bond is. And again, if you've heard me talk about my own pain and toxic stress exposure and emotional harm, my dog was everything to me. I give my dog full credit for getting me to where I am today. As I say, he never said a word, but he was always exactly what I needed. We see that so true so many times for so many families across the country. An interesting study that I wanted to take a look at is not only are these animals so critical for the things I've described, we also see them being as a potential or as a buffer to mitigating some of the significant harm children often experience in these homes. Again, if you've heard me speak, I talk about my own physiological damage from excessive toxic stress exposure, and just an overwhelming feeling of exposure, and my resulting broken stress response, a sped up response with observable brain changes and other physiological issues that health issues I'm still dealing with to this day. But we do see studies indicating that just having a dog present can be an effective mitigator of the harm from that stress response. Again, as I said, I don't know where I'd be today without my dog, but I know I wouldn't be here. I know that he did help me through those difficult times, and again, we see these pets doing this for so many children out there, in such just terrible home environments. Another example, I'm thinking of a recent um, example from actually a participant of one of my in-person presentations that came to me and said, she was fostering a child, and that she was feeling like there may just be no hope there, that they were having a lot of difficulties with the foster situation, that the child, it just wasn't working. She said he was from a home where he was exposed to a great deal of violence and abuse. That he just was having a lot of trouble opening up. She said, after hearing your talk, I started thinking about it, and he does talk about a pet, that he had a pet in that home, and we don't have a pet and we don't really talk about it. But now I'm wondering, if there might be something there that I could explore to see if that would make him more comfortable. Now, one of the things I would caution you with in this scenario, and what I said to her too, is, unfortunately, as we'll get into in a moment, children from these homes, or from homes where violence and abuse occurs, are at a higher risk, particularly when there's animal abuse in the home, of being an animal abuse perpetrator themselves. Just a heartbreaking reality of what we see in these homes. So I don't necessarily encourage running out, and didn't encourage her to just run out and get an animal, rather to find a controlled environment to kind of test this and see how it would go. And so I encourage her to reach out to her local animal shelter or animal control. They'll often have opportunities, that they often have many animals in need of someone to walk them and to take care of them. And so looking at a scenario like that, where the child could spend time in a supervised setting with an animal who also needs the attention. The report back was that just after a few times, that the child just seemed to be completely different. She said, we went from thinking that this foster, there was no way that this situation was going to work, it was heartbreaking, to now the child is completely opening up. There's just something about this interaction with these dogs at the shelter that seems to bring back, she said, it's just brought back new life into him. So again, I thought just an eye-opening example for me. And I hear it from child abuse professionals around the country when they're talking with children impacted by abuse, that many of them, more and more of them, are learning that talking about animals can be a great way to kind of break the ice and make a child feel more comfortable. You can, when you bring up animals, unfortunately, you may learn of animal abuse, which is important to know, but you also may again see that child relax and loosen up, because it does bring comfort to talk about an animal or pet, which may be their only, unfortunately, sole bright spot in their life at many times. Another study that I wanted to touch on as we kind of take this, unfortunately, into a just kind of a concerning and real but hard to think about direction. An excellent study from Dr. McDonald here, from Child Abuse and Neglect in 2015. I'm going to read just a few quotes from this article that describe children's experiences of pet abuse in the home, when also intimate partner violence is occurring. The first one, my dad last week said that he was very upset with my mother and that he was going to burn the bird's wings with a lighter. That day that my dad said he would burn my dog on the grill, I took him into my room and locked him in the closet with food and water until the next day. My dog always sleeps with me in my room so that my dad doesn't hurt him. I had this in yellow because this reminds me of another story I heard from a victim. Actually, a child was continually falling asleep in the classroom. The child was getting in trouble for it, was getting sent to the office for it. I mean, just kind of naturally, I think teachers assumed, like other teenagers or children his age, he was up late playing video games and was just falling asleep in class. After a few times, the school counselor kind of asked some questions and started kind of getting a read on something being wrong. The child eventually disclosed that he wasn't sleeping at home, and so school was really the only place he could sleep. He was concerned for his mother's well-being, but he was also very concerned for his German Shepherd's well-being, that The abuser in the home, his father had said that one day he was going to wake up and the dog was going to be gone. The dog was going to be dead. And so he slept with that dog in his bed every night. And he said the dog was so big, I couldn't really sleep. I didn't want to be apart from him because I figured he might not be there when I woke up. So again, just heartbreaking to think about, and the significant emotional trauma that that child is exposed to every day. And again, it doesn't mean every time a child's falling asleep in class that that's the case, but I think something important to think about, because we do hear other children saying the same thing, that they're so concerned and afraid in their own home, impacted by domestic violence, that school may be the only safe place where they feel like they can sleep, or they're just so tired by the time they get there that they fall asleep. So something again to be thinking about when we see that play out. When we tie in domestic violence or IPV, pet abuse in children, again, just a lot of concerns across the board. We know just in general, children are at 60 times the risk of abuse or neglect when they live in a home where domestic violence occurs. Probably even a low estimate there, but 60 times. When we add in pet abuse, there's no good number there. I'm hoping to try to come up with that. That's one of the angles I'm working on in my research now. I would project it at least double that, at least 120 times the risk of abuse or neglect when domestic violence and animal abuse is occurring. But again, not the number. I don't have the number for sure yet. But even without it, even the 60 times, we're already concerned. Obviously, they are significantly impacted for the reasons we've already described. And as we've said, they may be their sole source of emotional support. I've got the picture there of the stuffed animal, because unfortunately in the home that I'm describing now in an example, I think the family pet may have been killed. I know that there was no pet remaining or living in the home at the time, and the young child had adopted this stuffed animal as being their kind of source of comfort. And so the perpetrator would cut the ears off, the nose off, the arms off. Again, as I said, when we see these animals, whether it be stuffed animals or real animals, we often see the perpetrator targeting them because of what they represent to the members of the family. And so again, just heartbreaking to think about, and not fun to talk about, to be honest, but the reality is these things are happening, and they will continue to happen for as long as we allow them to happen in the shadows. We have to have these conversations, even though they're not fun, they're difficult. We have to have them, and acknowledge that these things are happening if we ever hope to stop them. Unfortunately, 75% of pet abuse incidents that occur in the home, if there's children residing in the home, the abuser will often go out of their way to make sure the children witness it. So 75% of incidents of pet abuse in the home, that the children will directly witness the event. And again, we see perpetrators often going out of their way. Again, if the act is about an attempt to gain control or inflict as much harm as possible, it's no surprise that the perpetrator would make the children watch it to try to create even greater harm on the children, but also on the adult, right? Having to see their children experience that. Again, something I can't even fathom, but we do see, unfortunately, happening very frequently in these homes. Unfortunately, again, a heartbreaking twist or angle of this: children in these homes are at risk themselves of going on to perpetrate animal abuse. There are a lot of mechanisms as why it may happen. Regardless of why it's happening, it's heartbreaking. We hear of children committing the act of abuse as a means of separating themselves from the pet, right? That they feel such connection and love to. They can't handle the pet being hurt. They can't handle feeling that hurt themselves. They become the abuser to try to separate that. We see children joining in and targeting the pet if they're trying to emulate the behaviors of the perpetrator. If they may also do it because if the animal is being harmed, maybe them or their siblings or their mother won't be harmed. I say mother, we know that men are victimized too in these homes. There's something about when you add in domestic violence and pet abuse, though, it is overwhelmingly, at least what's reported in literature, most often a male perpetrator and a female adult victim. We do unfortunately see these acts of animal abuse by children as being a very strong predictor of future perpetration of violence, and we are especially concerned, we're always concerned, but when it's younger children committing these acts, it seems to kind of speed up the process even more quickly. So we are extremely concerned. We have to pay attention when children are harming animals. It is often a reason to be extremely concerned, and indicates great need for intervention really as soon as possible. And when we talk about setting the cycle in motion, here's kind of the process we're describing. So this idea where a child is victimized by abuse or neglect in the home, may also witness or be injured or harmed in acts of domestic violence against their adult caregiver as well. And then often witnessing acts of animal abuse and leading to them perpetrating them themselves. And again, as I said, when we know children are committing acts of animal abuse, we have to pay attention. We're concerned by that act. And when we know that's happening, it's a reason to look backwards, right, to try to figure out if the child themselves have been a victim. But we also need to be thinking about what's likely coming next. We often see these children who commit these acts of animal abuse going on to commit acts of violence in the home, both as they get a little older and then even in their own adult lives and adult relationships. And then they're also at great risk to commit violence in the community and in the classroom as well. So again, when we know children are harming animals, we have to pay attention. Just being aware of what it often indicates or at least can lead to in the future. Finally, kind of to the extreme. So not all children who commit acts of animal abuse go this route, but it's important to note. I'm going to read a police a excerpt from a police report now. At this time, he states that he remembers his early family life as being one of extreme tension. He states the tension came from the relationship that existed at that time between his mother and his father. He stated although he was not physically or sexually abused and he did not witness any physical abuse from his parents, he stated that they were constantly at each other's throats and arguing. He states that his mother appeared to have some psychiatric problems and had, in fact, suffered a nervous breakdown at one time during his early childhood. He states that she was on medication and had been seeing a doctor much of the time. He states that he was advised by relatives that his mother suffered severe postpartum depression after he was born, and he took that as an indication that he was at least partially the problem for his parents' bad marital status. He states that he believes his mother became depressed after his birth and never quite fully recovered, and thereby he states he felt a certain amount of guilt in regards to the bad marriage of his parents. So again, we're talking about this individual goes out of the way to say that there was no physical or sexual abuse. This was all emotional, mental abuse and mental strain, emotional harm, toxic stress type exposure in the home. He also stated that during this time that he was cutting up animals. He would fantasize what it would be like to cut up a human being. So again, as I said, this isn't the route that all children take, but we see this individual, again, exposed to emotional abuse and abuse in the home, emotional harm, and then going on to harm animals. And this is the confession or police report of confession from American serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer. And the reality is, again, not to make this an extreme and say that all children who follow this route end up becoming a serial killer. The reality is, though, many serial killers do follow this route, as do school shooters and others who commit acts of mass shootings in the community. So again, are we saying that all children who are abused in the home emotionally or mentally, physically, whatever means, then go on to harm animals, then take this route? No, not all, fortunately. But there are some that do, and those who commit these acts often have this history. So again, we have to take these events seriously. When we know it's occurring, we have to intervene as early and as effectively as possible. And for multiple reasons. We want to mitigate harm to the child themselves and seek to save their life, and we also want to save them and from committing acts in the future of violence and harm, both in the home or in their community. Here are some of the references that are included in today's talk. A few more references. And then the final sample of some of the references I pulled from for today's talk. And then there's my contact information. Again, thank you for joining me. I will be continually adding new trainings to this channel, and you can see ways to contact me there. Again, can't be stated enough, pets are so critical to all families, but particularly these families. We have to protect pets if we want to effectively protect their people. We often can't separate the well-being of the children, of the adults, of the animals in these homes. We have to view them as a team, and we have to work to protect them all if we want to protect any of them. Thank you.